Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
How many are too many? That's the question to mull in the wake of news from the National Park Service that last year nearly 300 million people visited the national park system. Now, to put some context into that number, it's not the highest annual tally that the national parks have counted. Back in 2016, during the centennial of the National Park Service, nearly 331 million people headed out into the parks. But that doesn't mean that last year's number of 300 million, or almost, marked an improvement in your national park experience. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at National Parks Traveler. What is the perfect number for annual visitation to the National Park System's 423 units? We really don't know, because not all of those 423 units have specified the ideal carrying capacity for their parks, the number of visitors that doesn't impact resources, that doesn't strain the park staff, and doesn't adversely impact your national park experience. To help sort out the pluses and minuses of 300 million visitors a year to the park system, and to offer you some suggestions for escaping those crowds, we've asked Becky Lomax, author of USA National Parks, The Complete Guide to All 63 Parks by Moon, to return to the Traveler. We'll be back with Becky in a minute.
Washington State is graced with 3 spectacular national parks, each different and special in their own unique ways. As the official nonprofit partner and the only philanthropic organization dedicated exclusively to supporting these parks through charitable contributions, Washington's National Park Fund has a mission to raise private support to deepen everyone's love for, understanding of, and experiences in Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. Share your passion for these parks at WNPF.org. The Yosemite Conservancy helps visitors connect with Yosemite through adventures, volunteering, and the arts. It's the only nonprofit dedicated to supporting Yosemite National Park and funds grants to improve trails, restore habitat, protect wildlife, and inspire the next generation of nature lovers. Learn more at yosemite.org. In addition to some of the best rates in the country, Interior Federal Credit Union gives back their members more than other financial institutions in the form of dividends and low or no fees. With higher dividend rates, you can earn more in all your accounts, like certificates, money markets, or even a checking account. They focus to make sure that their members aren't being nickeled and dimed every time they make a transaction. That's the beauty of Interior Federal Credit Union. We all aspire to leave a legacy of good, right? One way or the other, our parks and public lands are all of our legacies. Join Wild Tributes for the Parks community with apparel that pays tribute to where legacy roams. Together, we can and will make a difference for the parks. Join us at wildtribute.com. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org.
Okay, we're back with Becky Lomax, the author of USA National Parks, The Complete Guide to how many parks? Becky, I know the first edition was 59 national parks. I'm guessing
Second edition was 62, and that's the one that's available right now. And the new one coming out this fall is 63.
Okay, I was wondering about that because the numbers seem to change quite frequently these days.
They do, quickly.
So I have to ask you, what was your initial thought when you heard that 297.1 million people entered the national park system last year?
Part of me went, oh my lands. And the other part was like, yeah, that seems like it's what happened. You know, it was definitely crowded, even outside around some of the bigger parks that they get, you know, like the top 10 and probably the top 15, 20, 25. It was crowded, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that number of 297 million was based on reports from 388 of the 423 park units. And of course, there are some park units, some of the smaller historical sites back east that are still closed because of COVID. And, they haven't opened those back up. And of course, we got to throw that caveat out there that the park system counting system is not perfect. There's a lot of issues that parks have with counters either malfunctioning, not functioning, adding counters, taking counters down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But still, 297 million, that's a big number. And as the Park Service pointed out, they didn't call it a concern, but I think it's safe to say that it's a concern that roughly half of those numbers, about 148 million, went to 25 of the 423 units of the park system. That kind of not only puts things in perspective, but boggles my mind.
Yeah, definitely. It just, and I look at what's in that 25 versus what the other national parks are. And it's like there's a ton of really good parks in the less visited ones. And then there's some small, tiny surprises that are in that top 25 too. So it's kind of an interesting division of the parks.
Which one surprised you in the top 25?
Indiana Dunes. I didn't expect it to be quite as high as it was. And I think it was up in the top 10.
It was 24.
Oh, it was 24?
24. 3.2 million.
What I'm looking at. Oh, you know what? I just have the list that's just the national parks, not the one named national parks. Yeah. And then the named national parks, it's like 9, which super surprised me.
Well, I mean, it's close to Chicago, no?
Correct. Yeah. And that's, I think that helps out the visitation there a lot.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, number 2 with 14.1 million. And a lot of that, I think, is just traffic driving back and forth between Tennessee and North Carolina, not necessarily getting off the highway and exploring the park.
Right. Or maybe not hiking or camping or anything else there.
Yeah. I mean, you've got Blue Ridge Parkway, 15.9 million, and a lot of people drive the parkway. It's a gorgeous scenic parkway. I don't think we should be surprised that the Natchez Trace Parkway showed up. Again, beautiful parkway, nice scenery, nice history, nice drive. I wouldn't say much surprised me. I mean, you've got a couple of the national mall sites, the World War II Memorial and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I'm really curious how they count numbers there since, they're all out in the open and next to one another.
Right. Yeah. All part of that mall area. So.
Yeah. And then Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, 3.1 million. I think we're going to see a big drop this year. I mean, Lake Powell keeps going down. Boat ramps keep coming out of the water.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get the Glen Canyon superintendent on the podcast in the coming weeks to get his take on how things are going in terms of coming up with solutions to the draining of Lake Powell. But that's certainly going to be interesting. Now, what also was interesting about the National Park Service release from Washington on the head count for 2021 was the new director, Chuck Sams, throwing out an appeal that, hey, folks, the top 25 are really nice, but there's a lot of nice other parks that you should really explore. I think that was the first time that I can recall a Park Service director taking that stance.
Yeah, I don't think we've heard that before. That was different.
And it was kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree. I mean, there are so many, when I look at the named national parks, the 63, there are so many in that bottom half that are just phenomenal parks. And, a couple of my favorites are down there too. Yeah, and, I just, people ask me where to go. And I say, go to those because you're going to avoid the crowds that are around some of the big 25.
And we're gonna make you name some of those a little bit later in the show this morning. But, a couple of weeks ago, we ran a poll on National Parks Traveler on whether people thought the parks were too crowded and whether they thought Yellowstone or Yosemite or Grand Teton or Grand Canyon or Rocky Mountain were too crowded. And it was the best poll we've run. We had almost 400 answers, 400 votes on that. And the bulk of them said, yes, the national park system is too crowded. And we've got a occasional commentator on the Traveler who uses the pseudonym Stephen Mather, and makes me wonder if he's a Park Service person. But anyway, his point was, balderdash. I mean, I can go and stand on the top of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park with my family, and I don't care if I'm surrounded by 100 or 1,000. This is a great national park experience. Maybe I'm getting too long in tooth, but I don't consider that a great national park experience. What are your thoughts?
Well, I kind of feel the same way. The closest park to me is Glacier. I'm 20 minutes from that one. And so I've been in that park a ton. 20 years ago, we could go up to Logan Pass, late in the afternoon, pack a, lunch in our pack for dinner, hike up to Hidden Lake Overlook, and, there'd be 10, 20 people on the trail total. Well, now if you do it, it's still, it's super crowded in the evening. It's not just crowded wall to wall people in the daytime, but those crowds now are extending further in the day. So even those times that you used to be able to get away from people and have more solitude on a trail, it doesn't necessarily happen in really crowded parks.
But there's the position out there that Mather expressed, that this is today's reality. And so, I've been trotting this earth. I'm going on my 7th decade. I can't imagine that. I always cringe when I say that. But, when I grew up in the 60s and went to college in the 70s, that was my perspective. And so, of course, today is going to be more crowded in places. But does that make it wrong? Because, if you take my parents who grew up in the 30s and the 40s, there would have been a totally different experience.
Yes.
And so they might have seen mine experience as, boy, it's kind of crowded there in the 60s, Kurt.
Yeah. It is a different experience, but I can kind of agree with what Mather said about, being on Cadillac Mountain and you're up there for maybe the sunrise or whatever. It's going to be gorgeous no matter what the number of people, definitely. But I still think the experience itself is different when you've got thousands of people doing something versus 15. And I'll give you an example. Going to Old Faithful, you go in the summertime, everybody loves seeing Old Faithful erupt. It's very cool. But you are watching that with, thousands of people rimming the geyser. You go in winter and you might be one of 20 people rimming the geyser, watching it go off. And that's an amazing experience to not have that many people around. And it's just like a very unique thing to experience with that kind of fewer people around the experience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, a number of years ago, I think it was less than 10, but more than 5. my one son and I, we went to Lassen Volcanic National Park, and we hiked up Lassen Peak, which is no small feat. And we got to the top of the peak, and it was like a party. I mean, there were people up there. They had brought beer up. They were, down in beers. There was, great cell reception. People were sending Instagram photos. They were tweeting, texting their friends. They were even calling their friends. And it was not, in my vein, a national park experience. It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
And along with what the Blue Ridge Parkway superintendent said about, the 15.9 million that visited her park last year, impacts are showing up. We're not hearing that from many, if any, other park superintendents, but what we are seeing are more reservation systems. I mean, Yosemite just announced the other day that they're bringing back their timed entry or their reservation system for this coming summer, not because of COVID, but they put the blame on construction projects that they have in the park. And they're good construction projects. They're funded by the Great American Outdoors Act, and so it's necessary work to keep the park looking beautiful and functioning and all that. But, do you think Yosemite should just make reservations a permanent thing. People have to get used to, you can't go out to your favorite restaurant if all the tables are full. So
Correct.
why should we be able to just keep putting more and more people into Yosemite or Yellowstone or Rocky Mountain?
Right, right. And, there's a point at which you get in the way some of the parks are designed with the roads, you need either an in and out or it's just one up and over and there's no choices to go off of that.
Right.
Some of those, you get enough vehicles on it and it becomes kind of a gridlock thing where, any emergency vehicle couldn't get up it. And a lot of cars, pulling off on places they shouldn't pull off and trampling the edges of meadows further, widening the roads essentially because they keep pulling off in more and more places to either watch wildlife or take a picture or, see the view or whatever. And those have impacts on the whole, not just the visual thing, but on the actual wildlife and plant life that's around those roads. So I think the impacts, you got the gridlock issue, you've got the safety issue, and then you've got the issue to the actual environment there that are important ones to consider with having too many people on some of those roads.
In one of my previous careers with the Associated Press, I found myself back in 1992 sitting in the office of Marshall Gingery, who at the time was the deputy superintendent of Grand Teton National Park, and he lamented to me the demands and the impacts of the growing visitation to the park system then. As he put it, he told me, I just read recently on the celebration of our 75th anniversary, the Park Service is caught in between hearing the call of the wild and hearing the call of the city. He said of all the threats to the parks, many believe the greatest threat is the one posed by the visitor. That was back in 1992. Reading between the lines of what we're seeing today with park visitation going up and up and up, and we hear this almost annual comment that for every $1 spent on the national park system or a national park, we're generating $10 in economic activity around the parks in the gateway towns. Now, back during my 1992 visit to Grand Teton, I also spoke to Pete Hayden, who at the time was the park's chief of resource management. And he told me this. He goes, I think sometime around 30 years ago, the National Park Service got into a mindset that we are a political entity. Therefore, we have politically knowledgeable people to manage our areas. In a lot of cases, those people came out a little shortchanged in the resource end. I mean, everything was negotiable. He went on to say, from my perspective, none of the resources of a national park are negotiable, period. That doesn't sit too well with management anymore, or some segments of the public. I think it's fair to say that those statements ring true today, no?
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, and it's every humans have such a big impact on the parks. And I know I was just talking about what happens on the roads, but some of the trails that I hike frequently have widened from a path that was 3 feet wide to something that you could actually, like the size of a 1 lane of road through like alpine tundra areas. That is not right. Yeah. And that's where, the park is stuck. How do you manage that? And how do you, what do you do to help protect the resource there and to keep people from destroying these meadows they're very fragile and they take forever to grow back.
That's a key problem. I know when I visited Yosemite National Park, and this might have been back in 2008, so it's been a while, I took a hike up out of Tuolumne Meadows. And it's like you said, I mean, it started out and you've got a group of like 3 or 4 people with backpacks on or whatnot. And they all want to walk side by side so they can talk. And so you had 3 or 4 lanes that people had created. And slowly they shrank down to 1 or 2. I know the park has been doing a lot of work up along the Tioga Road corridor. And I'll be curious, to go back and see how they've addressed that type of situation. Because it's a tough one. I mean, I would not want to be a park manager. I mean, Cam Shawley, the Yellowstone Park superintendent, and I talk frequently. And, I keep saying, why don't you go with the reservation system? And, he said, well, do you want to be deprived of coming to Yellowstone only once every 5 years? And he's got a point. But at the same time, if everybody's allowed in, what's that going to do to the resource, not to mention the visitor experience?
Yeah, definitely. Both of those are at risk from, just not having any management on it.
Yeah. No, it's a tough one. I mean, we've seen Zion National Park trying to control traffic on Angel's Landing, and I don't know how much that is due to resource or hiker safety, because that's it can be a treacherous hike depending on your perspective.
Right. And if you talk about more than a few people trying to pass at the same time along some of those really narrow stretches, that can be a little disconcerting.
Yeah. People going up, people coming down, hanging onto that chain.
Yeah.
Of course, last year at Great Smoky Mountains, we saw them put in a reservation system for trailhead parking.
Right, at Laurel Falls.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, really interesting. I don't think they're coming back with that this year. One thing I did hear the other day, apparently in Yellowstone, they're thinking about maybe requiring reservations to go to Grand Prismatic Spring, to walk that boardwalk.
That wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, what's happened there is there's a small parking lot and then a narrow road that accesses it. And so what's happened is this colossal parking mess with people trying to get into the parking lot to go do the boardwalk to the springs.
Yeah.
And I think what alleviated it a little bit was when a couple years ago, when the Conservancy there helped fund a new trail that would go up to the overlook of the Prismatic Spring. And so that gave people another option for how to see it if you couldn't get in the parking lot or park along the road, like as they often do. So that helped a little bit, but it's still, the spring has had so much, I want to say, Instagram publication and so forth, that almost has become, Old Faithful is a place that everybody wanted to go. Grand Prismatic is just almost right there with it as a place that everybody wants to go see because it's been publicized so much, I think.
And it's such a beautiful hot spring. And it was a couple of years ago that some fool decided to fly their drone over the Grand Prismatic, try and get some pictures. And the drone went down into Grand Prismatic, and I don't think it was ever recovered.
No, you can't recover a lot of that stuff that goes in there.
Yeah.
Ball caps that blow off people's heads and so forth. You see them sitting there and they're just gonna be part of the spring.
That's right. We're talking today with Becky Lomax, the author of USA National Parks, a complete guide to 62, working on 63, published by Moon. And we're talking about visitation to the National Park System. We're going to be back in a minute to look at some places how you can avoid those crowds of the top 25.
Whether it be strategy, business planning, change management, board development, executive search, or diversity planning, Potrero Group is here to help. They mix a depth of experience in the parks and land space with the breadth of best practices from other industries. For more information or to schedule a preliminary conversation, go to potrerogroup.com. Potrero group.com. The Everglades Foundation, the only organization whose sole mission is to restore and protect America's Everglades. Learn more at evergladesfoundation.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It is also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That is why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people, inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. The Grand Teton National Park Foundation is a private, nonprofit organization that supports projects that protect and enhance Grand Teton National Park's cultural, historic, and natural resources. By funding initiatives that go beyond what the National Park Service could accomplish on its own, Foundation donors improve the visitor experience and provide benefits to the National Park System for decades to come. See their successes at gtnpf.org. Nova Scotia. 8,000 miles of coastline dotted with colorful fishing villages, quaint coastal towns, and an abundance of scenic natural beauty. Home to 2 national parks, Cape Breton Highlands and Kejimkujik. Spend your nights under a canopy of twinkling stars. Spend your days exploring trails, beaches, historical waterways, and tons of cultural and recreational experiences. Visit novascotia.com today and start planning your natural getaway.
Okay, we're back today with Becky Lomax, the author of USA National Parks, the complete guide to all of the national parks that exist out there. Becky, looking at the crowding that has taken place in national parks, and let me run through that top 25 list. And this includes national parks, national seashores, national recreation areas, just to give our listeners a chance to understand what's in the top 25. We've got the Blue Ridge Parkway with 15.9 million visitors last year. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, 14.1 million. Golden Gate National Recreation Area, 13.7 million. Gateway National Recreation Area, the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, 9.1 million. Lake Mead National Recreation Area in Nevada with 7.6 million. The George Washington Memorial Parkway, 6.8 million. And I've got to wonder about that figure because a lot of people drive that to work in the morning. The Natchez Trace Parkway, 6.4 million. The Lincoln Memorial, 5.8 million. Gulf Islands National Seashore, 5.5 million. Zion National Park, 5 million. Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park, 5 million. Yellowstone National Park, 4.9 million. Amazing. Grand Canyon National Park, 4.5 million. Rocky Mountain National Park, 4.4 million. Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, 4.3 million. Acadia National Park, 4 million. I would have figured that would have more. Cape Cod National Seashore, also 4 million. Again, being so close to Boston, I'm kind of surprised it didn't have more. Grand Teton National Park, 3.9 million. The World War II Memorial, 3.7 million. Vietnam Veterans Memorial, 3.6 million. Yosemite National Park, 3.3 million. Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, 3.3 million. Cape Hatteras National Seashore, 3.2 million. Indiana Dunes National Park, 3.2 million. And Glen Canyon National Recreation Area with 3.1 million visitors last year. That's quite a diverse collection of parks across the country. Some of the numbers are surprising, some aren't surprising. But I'm wondering, after reading that and after hearing Director Sam saying that, hey, folks, we got to look elsewhere beyond the top 25, maybe you need to write a book on the most overlooked units of the national park system.
That sounds great. It sounds really fun, too.
It would be, and I don't think you're short of any wonders to talk about, to write about.
No, there's plenty out there. And, what's funny is people have often asked me about, like wildlife watching in Yellowstone. That's got to be the best place to go. And I'll often throw in, it's really good at Yellowstone, but Theodore Roosevelt National Park, oh man, the wildlife watching there is phenomenal. And it's a fraction of the people. And it definitely is, it's got amazing badland scenery. And then the wildlife in there, they've got everything from bison to wild horses that are really fun. And you don't get the wild horses in Yellowstone.
No. And that's a good thing, though.
Yeah, that would bring a whole nother factor in there. But yeah, it's, so Theodore Roosevelt is one of those parks that I say, yeah, go see that one. It's just incredible scenery and incredible wildlife watching there.
And it's got the great history of Theodore Roosevelt himself. And that's where he learned his conservation ethos, up there on the Elkhorn Ranch that he settled and lived and experienced the Wild West as it was starting to wink out. But no, definitely an interesting place. One thing that does surprise me, and one of many things that surprised me, is that the South Dakota parks weren't more represented. I mean, Badlands, Jewel Cave, Wind Cave. I mean, it's a perfect week trip. You can tie all those 3 parks and Mount Rushmore together, although Mount Rushmore is very crowded. But it's an easy drive going from each one of those parks to the next one. And you've got that rugged Badlands scenery and the bison at Badlands National Park. At Wind Cave, you got phenomenal caves and bison. Jewel Cave, again, phenomenal caves.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And actually, you can, if you're willing to do the 5-hour drive up to Theodore Roosevelt, you can add a nice little triangle with all the parks you mentioned, plus Theodore Roosevelt in there.
And if you're going to go that far, you might as well go a little bit further north to Fort Union. Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's a fascinating trading post. I mean, this was right on the Missouri River. You had the trappers come through there. You had the Native Americans coming through there. It was just lots of history. Anyway, what are some of your other suggestions for overlooked units in the National Park System that people should take a look at?
Well, one of them all I think of is color. When I think of it is Petrified Forest National Park.
Sure.
And its north end has the Painted Canyon there that is the oranges and rusts and yellows and just about every color that's connected with those 3 colors is in there. And it's just amazing color. And then you drive down through Petrified Forest Park, you get to the area called Blue Mesa, and suddenly it's changed from all these oranges to these layers that are blue and gray and maroon and white, just stacked one on top of the other. And hiking through that area, driving by it, the color is just a blow away. And then if you get on any of the little trails through the petrified wood areas where the trees have fallen over and the insides have crystallized, the color on the insides of those trees is amazing. I mean, you'll see yellows and pinks and blues. And how often do you look at a tree and see colors like that?
It is kind of fabulous, like a kaleidoscope of colors. One thing that takes away from Petrified Forest is you can't overnight in the park unless you go into the backcountry.
I know it.
And, you mentioned the North End with the Painted Desert Inn. Let's bring that sucker back. I mean,
you want to bring that back as an inn?
Sure,
yes,
sure. That's a beautiful facility. A lot of history there.
Yeah. And it's got some really cool indigenous art programs going on at it too, that I wouldn't want to see those disappear in favor of having people back at it, overnighting in it. But they do a lot of demonstrations of art and so forth there. That's really fun to see.
One place that I keep pointing out, and people probably get tired of hearing me say this, but Cape Hatteras last year had record visitation.
Mm-hmm.
I think 3 million or 3.2 million. You go a little bit south to Cape Lookout National Seashore, still on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, had around 550,000. Talk about solitude.
Exactly.
And sure, it's more rustic. You don't have lodges out there on the beach. You don't have a town there. You have towns on the mainland, but you get out to the barrier islands by what they call ferries, and they're really kind of skiffs, 19-foot, 20-foot skiffs that they'll take you out. Or, if you can go a little bit north and take one of the car ferries out there, but they only hold 2 or 3 or 4 cars at a time. And talking about solitude, and I know they've got those they call them fishing cabins, and I know they're having to relocate some of them because of sea level shifts and whatnot. But I just had one of the best experiences of my life out there.
Oh wow!
It's just cool. such a wild seashore that you can imagine what it looked like when it was whites first reached the continent.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think one thing that people should be aware of is not too many years down the road, I think 4, we're going to have the 250th anniversary of the United States coming in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And that in 2026, places like Valley Forge National Historic Park, Moores Creek National Battlefield, and Saratoga National Historic Site, just to name 3, probably are going to be a little bit more crowded than they are today.
Yes, I would assume so. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think they'd be, perfect places to visit this year.
Yes,
You know,
definitely.
people talk about Mesa Verde, and I know you enjoy Mesa Verde, as do I. It gets crowded. You can go over to Flagstaff, have your base camp in Flagstaff if you want to stay in a lodge there. And you've got, within an hour's drive, Walnut Canyon National Monument, Wapatki National Monument, Montezuma Castle National Monument, Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument, just an incredible collection. And not too much further down the road is Tuzigoot National Monument. And you can see a lot of the same history that you see at Mesa Verde. You don't have as many cliff dwellings as you do in one place as you do at Mesa Verde, but you've got some fantastic cliff dwellings at Montezuma Castle and, some ruins of cliff dwellings at those other places.
Right. And you don't have the crowds.
You don't have the crowds.
Yeah. So your chances of getting in there and to experience it without the panic of and anxiety and people elbow to elbow, it's a lot better.
Another one of my favorites is Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument down deep in Arizona on the Mexico border. Seldom visited. The numbers are really amazing. Let me see here if I can pull up the most recent visitation. But obviously, if you go to Organ Pipe, you don't want to go in the summertime because it gets awfully darn hot.
It's too hot.
But if you go, December, January, February, it is just marvelous. And you've got a lot of wildlife there too, between a lot of bird life, hummingbirds and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument is just a phenomenal place, and it's hard to believe. In 2021, it only saw 190,848 visitors. Now, certainly, some of this was concern over border crossings, which, when I was down there, and I wasn't down there last year, I was down there a few years ago, it wasn't an issue. I didn't experience any problems with that. They've got a marvelous campground. It's big. It's spread out. It's got solar heated showers, which are nice, but you got to watch out that you don't scald yourself.
Oh, too hot. Yeah. Yeah. The other park I'm just amazed at, that's down equally as far south, like right on the border, is Big Bend National Park. And to me, that one, for wildlife watching in the spring, the birds are phenomenal. And I remember hiking up through the Chisos Mountains. We did a backpack trip up through them. And we'd hike about a mile and then we'd just stop and listen. And it was like this incredible symphony of birds that we were listening to up there, because it's got so many migratory birds and songbirds and so forth coming through. And then ones that just stay there year round too. But that's an amazing park.
Well, yeah, but you can't get there from here. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. I was looking at airline travel down to Big Bend the other day, and they wanted to route me through Seattle. They wanted to route me through Atlanta. You can't get there from here.
No, you just fly into West Texas to like El Paso and drive over.
And 5-hour drive. But Big Bend has been discovered, Becky. Come on. I mean,
well, yes, but it's not in the top 25. So that's why I'm just still putting a little word in for it.
So maybe they should put a cap on visitation there. I mean, they had 581,000 last year, which, looking through the figures, that was the busiest year that Big Bend has ever experienced by a lot. I mean, the next biggest year was back in, it looks like 2019, when they had 463,832. And so you're talking almost 120,000 increase in 2 years. That's
a lot of increase. Yeah.
It is. But yeah, I understand it's a fabulous park. I haven't quite made it there yet. It's on my to-do list, and hopefully soon we can cross it off.
You can actually do a nice little triangle with Big Bend, Guadalupe, and Carlsbad Caverns.
Nice little. Define nice little. How many miles?
Well, it's a couple hours, 3-4 hours between Big Bend and Guadalupe, and Carlsbad, of course, are right next to each other. So sure. That's like 10, 15 minutes down the road from each other. But that's kind of fun to put those three.
Yeah. And Guadalupe for sure is an undiscovered jewel out there in the park system, popular with backpackers, but it's got some amazing cultural history with the Buffalo Soldiers out there and the Mescalero Native Americans who were unfortunately driven out of the area.
It also has some really good hikes that's fun.
It does. I understand that. Black Canyon of the Gunnison.
Yeah, there's one. And especially, if you want the solitude, get up to the North Rim because everybody goes to the South Rim.
Exactly.
And so there's ways to even get further away from people on that one.
No, again, that's also on my to-do list, but it sounds like a fabulous place. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law were out there and wrote a nice story for the Traveler a few years ago, and it just, with the solitude you mentioned, and it's got some great overlooks down into that black chasm of a canyon. Sounds like a phenomenal park that so far is off most people's radar.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is.
I was a history minor in college, and so I can't overlook the parks that preserve and interpret history. Places like New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park, or Salem. Hey, come on! I mean, we had Herman Melville sat in the pew there at the Seamen's Bethel in New Bedford, and that's where he got his idea to write Moby Dick. So there's some great literary history there, along with whaling history. Grant Coors Ranch, National Historic Site in Montana.
Yep.
Fabulous park. I really enjoyed it. It's not big. It's just a fraction of what the original Grant Coors Ranch once entailed. I mean, we're talking multiple states and into Canada, as I recall.
Yeah. And that's a fabulous place if you really are from anywhere outside of ranching country. It's a fabulous place to get a handle on what that whole life was about. Sure. It's still about in many places, and what it took to do these, manage these big ranches and keep them functioning and so forth.
Yeah, when I was there, one of the rangers actually was a practicing smithy. And so you could go and watch her or him, depending on who's doing it these days, bang out. They made me a boot pick from iron that they heated in their fire there, and they've got slices of I don't know if it was aspen or pine, and then they had the Grant Coors brand that they would brand into it, so you could have a coaster with the Grant Coors brand on it, and then. Not too far away, somebody else was making some cowboy coffee, and if it was a little brisk that morning, they'd give you a cup of cowboy coffee. You could take a wagon ride around the ranch there. The ranch house inside is just phenomenal with all the artifacts that they have from back in the 1800s.
Right.
So definitely one of my favorites. Well, Becky, I wish we had time to go on, but we don't.
Yeah.
So you say your next edition is coming out this fall?
Yes, it is. It should be out in October.
So have you told Congress that no more national parks until that book comes out?
I should, because every time one of my books comes out, the next month there's a new national park. So it's kind of like they wait for my book to come out, then do it.
Economic development, Becky, you've got the driver there.
Yeah, something like that.
We've been talking today with Becky Lomax, the author of USA National Parks, the complete guide to all 63 parks as of this fall. Becky, thanks so much about talking visitation in the parks. It's always fun, and look forward to getting you back here after your next edition comes out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kurt. It was fun to talk with you.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to be talking about wilderness in Big Bend National Park. It's an interesting story. We're also in the weeks ahead going to be visiting with the superintendent of Cape Hatteras National Seashore to discuss his visitation and also talk about rising sea levels and some of the impacts those are bringing to the National Seashore. And we've got some other exciting shows down the road. Thanks again for listening. For National Parks Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling national park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit nationalparkstraveler.org.